would you be able to quickly identify maybe very important either figures or works that were very influential in molding your personality, either that would have happened later or really even from the beginning?
First, the Quran. Most importantly, the Book of Allah Azza wa Jal. I remember reading it before I became Muslim, and and it would bring me. I would cry sometimes in my bed at night as I read it, and I would hide it. I would turn my bed lamp, my side light off, and I would put it under my bed, and it was this kind of inexplicable connection with it. I don't understand what it is. It's very hard to describe. But when you read the ayat of the Quran, right, it talks about the يعني وجلت قلوبهم, right? That their hearts tremor from
Absolutely.
it, right?
Yes.
And their hair stands up. And I think that's the feeling that I had, but I didn't know what it was at that time. Of course, I didn't understand what those feelings were. In hindsight, of course, when you read and you see, and they fall on their athqan, on their chins, and they do, and all of these things. Now, then you see what the power of the Quran is, you know. And it had a very profound impact on my heart, which I kept secret for a long time, for fear of reprisals. Of course, in a post 9/11 world, I mean, it was very dangerous to talk about these things, and I would and combined with that, the listening to the Quran itself. And then a friend of mine gave me a book on the life of the Prophet. I don't remember the name of the book. It was a big green book, and it was about the life of the Prophet and his role in other religious traditions, or the foretelling of his coming in other religious traditions, and a little bit about prophecies. Yeah. And I would say these two books. I was very young. I mean, I'm probably like 17 years old at the time here. These two books, the Quran and this other book about the life of the Prophet and his coming, had a really profound effect on my heart. And there was something at that moment, as the months went on, which I can't explain, where I felt like my heart was tied like a rope to that of the Prophet, to the Quran and the Prophet. You can't describe that feeling. It's that feeling of your heart when you hear his name, your heart trembles. Just the name of the Prophet, but not Ali and Fatima. All that's a later story, but just the Prophet and his life in Makkah, his life in Medina. And I would say those two books really had, of course, the Book of Allah. And I don't remember the name of this book, but it was something about the Prophet and his coming and just who this person was. And apparently the foretelling or some references to him in Hindu texts, because I was a Hindu.
Yes.
And these had profound effect on me as well. And there were many other things as well, but it's just a few things, yeah.
And then were there any specific personalities, figures, people who either at that time or later entered into your life and would have started shaping the person that you are today?
Definitely. I mean, I owe a huge debt of gratitude, of course, first to Allah Azza wa Jal, al-awwal wal-akhir. But after that, Dr. Liaquat Takim, and I'll tell you why. Because his son, Professor Dr. Liaquat Takim, his son and I went to school together, and his son found out I'm becoming Muslim or interested in Islam or whatever, and he's like, my dad's a Maulana. Like, why don't you come over? Like, you can ask him questions.
Yes.
And Dr. Takim at that time, I was a very young boy, and Dr. Takim obviously was a professor of Islamic studies at the University of Denver, University of Toronto. I don't remember where he was then at the time. I think at U of T. Or he was in between universities at the time, and he had this massive library. I mean, huge. Although in retrospect now, I think my library might be the same size or bigger than his. But anyhow, at the time, I mean, that library was huge. And he gave me books, and he used to give me so much time and explain to me Islam and sit with me. And where if he's going somewhere, he'd say, hey, let me pick you up. We can chat in the car. And those initial conversations were some of the most beautiful conversations I had in my life that I cherish. After Dr. Takim, especially, this is now the turn towards understanding Islam, and he took me into his home as almost like a son. in that sense, almost like that, like his family, and because obviously, and then I had other friends as well. But as far as someone who can intellectually, guide me and spiritually guide me, he was my first point of contact, who happened to live down the street from me. So I remember I would walk over to his house, and then after that, of course, very quickly came in 2002 winter, came Sayyid Muhammad al-Radawi, Rajul Islam wal Muslimin, Sayyid Muhammad al-Radawi, Allah Maqama, who then from that day, for the past 17, 18 years, has been my teacher. And I remember asking him a question one day. I was just a young man. I don't even think I even barely had a goatee. I barely had even the hairs here. Then definitely not a beard like this. Very just light hairs on my face. And I come up to him and I ask him a question. I say, well, why do Shia slander the Sahaba? And he looked at me and he told me, come and see me and we'll chat about it. And then that was the beginning of a relationship of 18 years with him as his student, learning from him for all these years. And he was so patient with me and teaching me. And we would meet in evenings in his office where he'd have a pile of books and notes every time he would meet me. And he would not give me the reasons, the answers. He would let me come to my own conclusions, right? And now in hindsight, people are like, wow, you had that kind of interaction with him. And at that time, I didn't know who he was. I just thought he's just a scholar. Then obviously as time went on, so those two individuals at the beginning of my journey were absolutely pivotal in me being,
Yes.
guided. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Those two
So
people.
thank you very much for that. I think fascinating journey and fascinating experience. Let me